The views and opinions expressed in this podcast do not necessarily reflect the views or positions of Acuma, its board of directors, its management staff, or its members. The podcast discussion presented is conversational in nature and for general information only.
This is Acuma's On Point Podcast. On today's episode, we focus on how technology can be used to deepen, not replace, human relationships. Ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, hello and welcome to Acuma's On Point Podcast, a series focused on sharing the stories of people who are making a positive impact in the credit union mortgage industry. I'm your host, Peter Benjamin. Today, I am joined by Ayo Opeyemi, co-founder of Vertyx. Ayo, how are you doing today?
I'm doing pretty well. It's great to finally be on one of these. I've listened to a few episodes, so I'm honored to have the fortune of speaking with you both today.
No, I appreciate the fact that you listen to us. That truly does mean a lot. It means that, Justin and I aren't just sitting here for about 45 minutes, just really talking about nothing. Well, we kind of sort of do just talk about nothing.
Sometimes.
Yeah, quite often we talk about absolutely nothing.
Those are the best podcasts, though. I'm an avid podcast listener, so a little bit of content, a little bit of, just background entertainment is a good combo.
Yeah, absolutely. But Ayo, as you know, before we get too far into the conversation, as always, got to pull Justin into the conversation. Justin, the Hawk, please tell us what's the latest race happening over at Acme. And by the way, how are you doing today?
I'm good, Peter. How are you?
I'm good, man. Thank you very much for asking.
Sorry, it's the allergies. You already said it. It's the allergies.
I know,
I've been
man.
fighting them since January, and here we are still fighting.
I don't know what. I thought I was coasting through this allergy season, no problem whatsoever. Went to Dallas, it hit me. Came back, went to St. Louis, fine. Came back from St. Louis, it hit me like a ton of bricks, literally the second I got off that airplane. And I don't know why, but it's tough. Anyways, what's happened over at Acuma?
We've officially wrapped up all of our in-person events for the first half of the year. So you can hear that sad. See, I was going to go with the sad violin music, but maybe, thank God. Yeah, okay.
No, it's
bittersweet.
It's bittersweet, but this is the first year we changed it up a bit. Normally we have, 3 weeks, almost a month break in between our events, right? This year we did it different.
We decided to be more brazen with our schedules, and
we went every other week. And there were some weeks where
you couldn't tell if you were coming or going.
Yeah, I would land from our event and then fly out to someone else's event and then come back and then fly out to one of our events. And so happy that the first half is over. Now I can sleep for the next month or two in my own bed, which I love. Anyways.
Yeah, see, there you go. In all seriousness, though, summits and workshops have finally finished for the year. They were absolutely amazing. The engagement collaboration was always wonderful to see. Up next for our in-person events, we have our Make Your Mark annual conference. That's happening in Las Vegas this year from September 20th to the 23rd. Registration is open, so head over to the Acuma website to get registered and to learn more information. We look forward to seeing you there. Virtually, we have our underwriting quarterly network meeting happening on June 9th. And this, I think, is the first time we'll be unveiling on the podcast that we have a new network that is going to be starting up on June 17th, the Women's Professional Network. So head over, see both of those network events. I'm sure they're going to be great with a lot of great content and collaboration. And then lastly,
our very own Nicole Herrick is heading up the Women's Network.
She is.
and she is going to bring a lot of crazy ideas to the table.
I know. We kicked her off the marketing network, and she went and made her own because she was like, Bet.
That's right.
I'll
I'm
get
going to take my basketball and I'm going home.
Exactly. No, we didn't kick her off. But lastly, we have our On Point podcast dropping every 2 weeks, along with our Insight Track webinars happening a couple times a month. So for all this information plus so much more, head over to the Acma website.
Awesome, man. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
All right, Ayo. So Justin, I'm going to bring you into this little part right now. Here's a little fun fact. Ayo has blessed us with the fact that he is the first Harvard graduate to be on this podcast. Tell you what, we are elevating.
Oh, thank God we're not playing Jeopardy.
No, I thought it was intentional on that. Switch it up.
No, I've lost to some PhDs already. Like, I don't need to add Harvard grad.
Seriously. I could, when I saw that, I was like, oh man, we are finally getting some good talent on this podcast. Anyways, that's awesome. Anyways, so yeah. I when I saw that, I had to throw that out there that we finally have a Harvard grad on our podcast. Means you're extra smart. Wow. But you listen to the podcast, and again, thank you very much for that. And so I'm sure you've heard me go through my normal transition of how excited I am, which I truly am. I've gotten to know you. You were in St. Louis, and you most certainly contributed to the conversation there. And that's the first time I actually got to meet you in person and get to know you. And ever since then, it's really just been, a blessing. But so for those people who do not know you, as always, I'm going to start with that first question. The first question is meant to go back to our roots of being a people piece. Right. That question is really, who is Ayo Opeyemi? For those who do not know.
Yeah, happy to introduce myself. And it's always great to, share the space with others. So my name is Ayo. I run a technology QSO focused on working with credit unions, really engage their members post-close in that lifelong relationship. So the place we operate is, after close, we provide technology solutions to augment that personal relationship that is hopefully a multi-decade relationship when it comes to mortgage lending. So some of that includes working with folks on automating workflows associated with servicing workflows. Some of that is associated with engaging members as far as what we like to call relationship management and how you provide value beyond the closing table. And some of that is centered around how you engage with your subservicers to provide oversight to make sure your members are getting the best quality service. So that's kind of what we do today. A little bit about myself, my background is, I'm the son of Nigerian immigrants. We came to this country in 1999 or 2000. And actually one of the first banking relationships we had was with a credit union who, provided a bank account for my parents. And, that lifelong relationship still holds true to today because, my father still holds that credit union relationship. It was actually my first account as well. And so that's kind of, an early introduction into the power of credit unions and some of those lifelong relationships. Professionally and personally, I went to Harvard. I studied applied math and computer science. Great university and great opportunity to really form a holistic perspective on different ways that markets touch personal relationships. So, from that, worked in finance and software, spent a lot of time looking at how software can be applied to provide meaningful outcomes to folks, not just, cool new technology, but how you kind of measure that. And one of the spaces that, sits in the intersection of finance and software is, frankly, the mortgage market. It touches countries, global markets by the MBSs. It touches homeowners. And so it's one of the most pervasive assets that touches multiple people across different life paths. And, that's really what's attracted me to the space. And the credit union community has been great for a lot of what we're building. So that's a little bit about myself.
No, and I love this story, right? I mean, and it's a story that we often hear, right? It's so, just like Joe Smith or Susie Smith or Johnny's first account was with a credit union, and ever since then, they kind of just fell in love with that movement because of I've likened it to, the old classic TV show Cheers, like everybody knows your name, and
Right.
there's just something a little bit more personal and caring about that movement. So I
Right.
love hearing that even today you still are a believer in it, and even if you step away, you find yourself coming back.
Mhm.
But let's kind of go back to the technology side, because I think that's the main conversation we want to have today.
Mhm.
And I was so thrilled that you suggested this topic, because it's a topic we talk about quite often on this show or on the pod, and it's I don't think it's a topic that we can talk about enough, right? And I've said this before, and Justin's heard me say this, and you may have heard me say this, that when you look at the mortgage industry, right? And I'm just focused on the mortgage industry, not just credit unions. The mortgage
Right.
industry, the mortgage industry is probably 2 to 3 years behind healthcare when it comes to technology, or the utilization of AI or something like that.
Yeah.
And then when you boil it down and you look at credit unions within that mortgage industry, we're probably 5 years behind the rest of the industry, right? And so
Right.
I think that topic that you pose and of how technology can be used to deepen, not replace that human relationship,
Right.
was so spot on, because I think that's one of the barriers
Totally.
to credit unions wanting or willingness to adopt.
Right.
And is that fear? And I think it's fair to call it a fear. Is that fear going to continue the negative trajectory that we're seeing in the reduction of credit union numbers, right?
Yeah.
And so I welcome your thoughts, and let's kind of go down this conversation.
Yeah. And I think it's a great point, because, at the end of the day, the credit union mission is people helping people. And I think the way to think about some of the technology that's being introduced is not to disintermediate that mission or goal, but really to augment the amount of people helping people that one can do. So, for example, there's this concept called tech-enabled empathy that I like to talk about, which is really functioned around how technology can help, improve your reach and increase your reach in the member's life. So there's kind of two dynamics involved in that. One is using technology to automate things that are human intensive, time consuming, things that don't necessarily, make that member relationship differentiated or personable in any way. So that can be if you're doing certain manual processes. Those are times and amounts that are taking away from touch points that can be spent helping a homeowner understand, hardship options, or understand opportunities to refinance, or, get better relevant products to what they're looking for. There's the other aspect of, credit unions have grown and have a strong footprint, as you have thousands, and in some cases, tens of thousands and hundreds of thousands of members, is how you analyze data and use technology to surface personalized insights, so that when, somebody's receiving a message, they're not thinking about it like, hey, my rate dropped 50 basis points and I'm just getting spammed. It's really, hey, we saw this going on. We think that this can save you X amount of dollars, and that's why we're presenting it to you. This isn't spam. This is just because we want what's in your best interest. And so I think it's understanding where technology can succeed and augment workflows versus, I think those that will be successful in this, technology revolution are those that understand the value of human insight and intelligence versus where machine intelligence operates and things like that. So I think, what we try to do is really partner with folks to provide them the tools so that, they're not necessarily, fighting a battle with one hand tied behind their back. And so a lot of that is, and you're seeing this a lot in the market, is how technology contracts are structured, is, thinking about more success-based metrics that, if you're a credit union of any size, you're able to, participate in that technology revolution without paying those large implementation costs or things like that. And so I think these are some of the things that are unwinding in the market. And I think it's really positive for the credit union movement, because it allows folks to really use the strength of technology, but also use the strength of that human-to-human relationship that credit unions have invested decades building. So,
No, you really did an excellent job of hitting the nail on the head, and that first part of the conversation, and it reminded me of a conversation I had with a loan officer who I past life. I was head of a mortgage division, and I used to have one-on-ones with loan officers quite often, and that your comment of technology is really there just to augment, not replace, right?
Uh-huh.
Reminded me of this conversation. Granted, this was 9 years ago at this point, so it was a long time ago, and technology's evolved
Totally.
quite far. But this just happened, a year or two after, the classic rocket mortgage commercial where, on the Super Bowl, and you saw the rocket shooting straight up. And I remember just sitting down with this loan officer, and he was a seasoned loan officer, had been in the industry quite some time. And I just remember him. I was like, I asked him, I was like, what's preventing you from going out there?
Right.
What's preventing you from hitting your numbers? And he's like, well, I just have this fear that takes over, and I start second guessing myself. And that fear is that, I'm going to be without a job in the next year because technology is going to take over and they're not going to need me. And I just remember, I didn't laugh at him, but I remember just saying, that's nonsense. Like that's never going to happen. There's always going to be that human factor.
Hold on.
But I share this story because I even today, we'll say 9-10 years after that rocket mortgage commercial came out,
right?
I honestly think there's still a real fear that people have, even within credit unions, that by bringing on this AI, by bringing on this tech platform, by bringing on some technology enabled efficiencies, I'm going to be without a job,
right?
And I kind of go back to
the robot uprising.
What's that?
It's the robot uprising.
I mean, I saw Terminator 2, man. I mean,
yes, I saw Terminator. Did not paint the picture.
I saw Terminator 1, 2, and all the rest. I'm saying 2 as well. But yeah, I mean, there's plenty of movies that joke around about it, right? Not joke around about it. I mean, Terminator is kind of scary, but I'm just, I don't know how we get past it. And going back to a comment I said earlier, is this fear, in your opinion, gonna continue to hinder credit unions from growth to the point where I can't remember the numbers, but I want to say in 2017 there was like 5,000 credit unions. No, sorry, 17,000 credit unions. And here we are today, just shy of like 5,000, right?
Yeah.
Is technology playing a role in that because they're not adopting that, this fear?
Yeah. So there's a couple thoughts on that. I've talked to some friends in different industries, and I've kind of come around this thesis where if you study history over time, one thing you'll see is often with each new technological revolution, and there have been many that have existed, is you get this the wheel, the printing press, even like roads. That's a technological revolution, and you get this abundance of options that exist. So when the printing press emerged, there's more information. People need to make sense out of that noise. When you get more roads, you get more endless options of places to visit. You need someone to curate that experience. And I think, what you saw in history is the printing press, you had more librarians, you had more scholars who would kind of curate what the canon was for folks to focus on. With roads, you had the Michelin guide who would, highlight certain restaurants worth making a journey to. And I think in a similar capacity, and I guess the most recent one is Google, actually, where you have 1 billion websites to visit, and you have some, value creation centered around the idea of, which ones are relevant for me. So to your point earlier about, where technology sits is, if I'm a loan officer, owning a home is, very personal. I have questions I need, people to engage with. It's not just, am I getting hit by spam and offer? It's, who has my best interest in mind? And I think that's why some of these positions will always have humans involved. And the question is, how can you provide value to remain relevant? And I think part of that is, using the tools to know what's going on in that person's life and understand how you present information in a way that's super personable. I think the arc of history, supports this thesis. And I don't think, while AI is a different technology, it doesn't deviate from what historical patterns is kind of shown on that front. And so I think that should give comfort to folks to kind of challenge them to embrace it, because that's where value has historically lied. And that's where, probably will continue to lie. And so if you're able to not just, for example, the way I put it is, not just output automated outputs, but functionally say, I see from this system that's talking to this system that this is what's relevant for folks of this kind of demographic or demeanor or things like that, is, that's really how you can be helpful in today's day and age. And I think that's really where the future lies. And I think the great thing is, at least hearing from some of the Acuma summits I've been to, is I think there is really a lot of momentum around that. And it's really encouraging to see folks begin to not fear it, but embrace it and, try to look for folks that they can work with to help them, stand up some of these practices, to train some of the folks to understand how these tools work. Because, even myself, every, 2 weeks, there's something else coming out and it's hard to keep track of. And, sometimes it's just really hard to keep track of and understand how it impacts your day to day. So I think, what you'll start to see is folks really embrace some of these tools and see a lot of value out of it.
I love that you tied it back to the printing press and roads, because, and if you think about it, these were inventions that changed, modern man, right? Humankind. And so when they first came out, or when they were first done, right? And you can look at roads going all the way back to, the Roman times, but let's look at more of a modern road,
right?
And the great expansion in the United States, right? Where, was it the New Deal with FDR, where he did, all the highway system basically. Mm-hmm. And look at us doing history lessons today. I tell you, it's that Harvard grad bringing out the best.
We're touching everything. We're combining history. We're combining tech, and it all comes together.
Right. But when you think about that, and you think about the printing press, and you think about these roads, they were created, right? And then regulation caught up to them. And the regulation was seen as a need to control what was printed. Right. In some cases, when you look at the printing press, it was almost banned, right? But regulation all the same.
Right.
Same thing with roads, right? I mean, when you factor in cars and highway speeds and the need for seat belts, regulation comes, right?
Yep.
I think, and I'm not arguing whatsoever. I think one of the this is more just a general statement. I think the tough part that we face right now with this new evolution, with this new, although what AI has been around since the late 1800s, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
I think that was when the first time AI was used in text, something like that.
Yeah.
But you think about it, and this is the first time where the technology is evolving faster than the regulation can be created.
Yeah. And I think to that point, it's because the technology is moving so quickly that, unlike some of those other innovations, it's hard to kind of see cause and impact in a way that can, allow you to stem the tide of what's going on. And, I think that's kind of, and, you're seeing it, from different administration to administration, and without getting involved in that, is I think that's where it, you have to really ask yourself, in what you're doing and what you're using, is it helping the end homeowner? Because I think, regardless of how regulation ends up shaping up, it's really are you using these tools with the best interest in mind of folks? And I think that's really a competitive advantage that's native to folks who have been doing it like this for a while. But yeah.
So kind of going back to like this, you said it was tech-enabled empathy.
Yep.
Right? And so let's pretend that, some of our listeners are, let's just role play. Not pretend, but let's role play. Some of our listeners are, looking at a piece of AI. And I think AI is a good example because it's the most controversial at this moment in time. Or most debated about. Not controversial, debated about. And you have this mortgage leader who wants to bring on some type of AI platform to help with efficiencies. I think there's two conversations that have to happen, right? One with the executive side, getting their buy-in to allowing this. And the other is maybe, I guess, I don't want, when I say operations, I mean the mortgage division as a whole. But on the operations side, getting your staff to buy in so they know that they're not going to be replaced, right?
Totally. Yeah.
And so when you go out and you're talking to these credit unions, how are you? And if there's a third conversation that has to happen, please tell me. How are you instructing them to have these conversations?
Right. And the third conversation I'll maybe hit is I think folks are always concerned, especially when tools hit their underlying member or the folks that they're hoping to work with. And I think the first part is really buy-in for, the loan officer or the person using these tools, whether it's a loan officer or servicing agent, is really understanding how it makes their life easier. And I think part of that is kind of demonstrating, where their day-to-day kind of sits today versus where it would sit, after using the solution like this. So, as much as people really enjoy their jobs, I think there are parts of every job that people like more than others. And so, for myself and other jobs, there are things that are super manual that I wish I could fast forward and do. And I think a lot of that is what we're trying to remove is, the way I think about it is if, for example, I'm a servicing officer and I'm spending hours reading through insurance documents and updating some of those policy information, that takes a lot of time. It's super tedious. And, chances are I, probably have more impact on somebody's home by, getting the context and understanding how to reach out to them when I get that update and say, hey, your insurance went up by this amount. How can we help you because your escrow is going to go up in the future and things like that. So I think it's really like understanding and highlighting the manual work we're removing, because I think that kind of highlights to folks that this is the value that you're getting out of it. And I think on the admin side, I think a lot of it is, what we've kind of employed is more success-based, usage-based traction where you can kind of see, as we grow, you grow. And I think that's what you're starting to see a lot of technology companies employ versus the traditional model, which is just, you're going to buy licenses for every person and we're going to make it really hard for you to add new people and it's going to cost more money. Because the reality with software deployment these days is it's easier to deploy software. You don't have as high of those infrastructure costs. And so any software you're employing should probably grow as you grow and have a success-based outcome. So I think that's kind of how you hit both of those where, management is, looking for the impact it's having. It's nice to deploy new things, but you need it to have a real impact. And so I think that's kind of how we touch both of those. And then I think the third rail is, really emphasizing that when it comes to interacting with the end member, it's still a human at the end. We're not doing automated, outbound or automated messaging like that. I think, that's really where if I'm somebody, thinking about servicing experiencing hardship, I want to hear a person. I want to talk to somebody, that, I've been on customer service, for other projects and other products. And it's really frustrating when I can't get to a human. And so I think it's really understanding the niche roles that technology has to play. So,
thank you for answering that.
Yeah.
And in the beginning, you said something. You said like there's parts of your jobs that you like, and there's other parts that you don't, right?
Yeah.
And the second you said that, and I just thought back to when I used to originate, the thing I hated the most was actually completing the application. And when I say completing the application, like I was one of those loan officers who always submitted a completed file, meaning I have already gone out and looked up the employer address.
Right.
I completed it in every single type of field you could think of on that. What was the 1003? And I hated that because it was just
manual.
Manual.
Yeah.
But now you have technology that can do it.
Right.
But the thing I love the most about that job, and I actually still miss it, a great deal, was asking my borrowers, my members on the phone in person, tell me about your hopes and dreams.
Right.
And then just having that intimate conversation with them about, before I even started typing, before I even started using my pen to take notes, just having a conversation about what they were hoping to do, now in the next 7-10 years. I miss that part of having that conversation with them. And so I love that the way you framed it up, because you are spot on.
Yeah.
Spot on.
And just to touch on that too, is I think sometimes what you kind of miss, or folks miss in that, is functionally, the time that you're spending filling out, for example, that, loan application is time that has a cost attached to it, not to touch into another subject of economics, but the idea of opportunity cost is a real thing. And, we don't have infinite time in this, world or during the working day. And so, that time that you're spending, even if it's 30 minutes for every application times however many applications, meaningfully adds up. And, it degrades the experience that maybe your homeowner that's going through this process is experiencing. And, there's a compounding effect to that, where if I, start a loan application, maybe I even close the loan and I'm not feeling thrilled with the experience, that then leads into this retention issue. And then that leads into a compounding issue that, eventually has to get solved. And so to your point, there's real cost associated with that beyond just, does it get done or not? And I think that's the other thing that tech is great at, is, making it easier to kind of get the best of both worlds in some context. So
well said. Well said. Well, Ayo, it's time for us to start transitioning. But as always, before we head over to that second segment of the pod, always going to ask that last question. And it's really that the second part of the first. What keeps you going? We learned about who you were, and we learned about what your thoughts on this very important topic. But what keeps you going? What drives you?
Yeah, I'd like to describe myself as a naturally curious person. And I think, everybody has that memory of a kid of always asking why. And, my parents, I guess, tolerated my whys a little bit more. So oftentimes I would ask questions and, kind of ask why and why and why. And I think that's really led me to kind of inherit this posture where functionally when there's a question or there's a challenge or there's a situation that exists, I always ask, why does it have to be this way? And I think that allows you to find creative solutions. And so that's kind of, what I'm seeing today and continues to drive me and motivate me, is this idea that, the home is one of the most personal assets that people can own. And, functionally sometimes experiences are suboptimal because, there's just so much involved. And so why does it have to be this way? And, what are ways that, I can kind of, play my part in improving some of those experiences. So creates a challenge every day. And I think that's kind of what drives me to, wake up and, try to put one foot forward and find some sort of incremental solution there. So.
Well, I love that. And I'll just add this personal anecdote that as a father of 3 young kids who are constantly asking why, I applaud your parents for entertaining your whys, because that is easier said than done, my friend.
Totally. I have 3 siblings. So when you get, 4 children in total asking why, it takes a lot of patience. So shout out to my parents there.
Yes, they're saints. they are saints. Well, Ayo, let's go ahead and transition to the second segment. Now, this is where we sometimes, play Jeopardy. Sometimes we do our new game of wrong answers only. But today we're doing the most requested fan favorite, the number one of every episode. It's near and dear to my heart and Justin's. We are doing dad jokes. And so prior to the episode, I actually come prepared with 2 to 3 dad jokes. So here's what's going to happen. You're going to share 2 dad jokes. If one of them bombs, you have your third as a backup. And it's just the 3 of us just really joking around laughing. And so bombing, and Justin and I tend to be the only ones that actually bomb. But you'll do your 3, Justin will do his 3, I'll wrap up with my 3, and then we're done for the day. Sound good?
Cool. Do I go back to back?
Just go back to back, yeah.
All right. Well, I guess the first one, speaking of homes, is curious. Did you guys hear about the guy who added a second floor to his home? It's a whole other story.
I hate, oh, God. Oh.
Reel you in and then hit you with the little...
It's like, the worst part was like, I know this. I think I know this. I know this. But no, it was good. Right. Perfect. Good time.
Well, that's good that, got a little laugh there. But I guess the other one was, I think I was thinking about, jokes to tell, and I was going to tell a joke about a dandelion, but I didn't want to blow it. So, so those are my 2. So hopefully some chuckles from folks.
Hands down, that was good. That was good. All right. Hawk.
What has 4 wheels and flies?
What?
A garbage truck.
Oh, flies. I see you.
Thank you, Ayo, for laughing at that.
I was picturing something in the air, but then I was like, flies. That makes sense.
That gives me a headache. I'm sorry.
How do trees access the internet?
How do trees... how?
They log in.
All right, I'll wrap up. Why did the math book look so sad?
Why?
It had a lot of problems.
Oh,
there you
go. Why did the coffee file a police report?
I don't know.
It got mugged.
All
right. Well, Ayo, that wraps up this episode segment of Dad Jokes. Ayo, kind of just going back and getting all serious. I enjoyed today's conversation. Thank you for your willingness to be on our pod. This was great insights. I love what you brought to the table, and I'm hoping that our listeners kind of take away some good nuggets to kind of go back to their executives and really start considering that idea of tech-enabled empathy. I think that was such a brilliant idea. So again, I said it once, I'll say it again. Thank you so much.
No, thank you guys for having me. This was a lot of fun, and hopefully, in the future I can join again. So appreciate it.
Absolutely. And Justin, as always, thank you.
Of course, it was my pleasure.
And to all of you, we know your time is valuable. Thank you for tuning in to the latest episode of Acuma's On Point podcast. We hope you enjoyed it. Until next time, be well, my friends.
Thanks for listening. We'll see you next time at the Acuma On Point podcast. If not already, be sure to subscribe and give us a 5-star rating. For more great episodes and information, visit us online at acuma.org. And to get the latest updates, head over to our LinkedIn page.